Hey guys, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to work on the character stat system. We're going to have a very simple system where we just have stats that we can define very easily, and we can also add modifier to the stats to increase or decrease based on certain conditions. Let's say we equip a sword, or we drink a potion that will give us a power level boost or something like that. It's going to be a very simple system that you can extend on depending on what your game requires. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create the file that's going to house the base stat class. So I'm going to call this base stat. And this is going to be the class that every stat is based on. And that base stat is a very descriptive name. So I want to set up a couple ways to create a stat and then add modifiers to the stat. And then we also want to be able to calculate the final value of the stat based on the modifiers in the modifier list. So we'll need a couple methods to do that as well. So let's start off with, I want to type prop and hit tab a couple of times in Visual Studio, and it's going to set up a property for me. And then with, let's see, we'll do int, and the name of this property is going to be, let's just say, base value. That's going to be the starting out value for the stat without any modifiers added to it, just in case we want to get the value of the stat without any armor or anything like that added to it. That will allow us to do that. I then want to, we're going to have a name for the stat just in case we want to display that in the character sheet in game. So I'll just type in string and we'll call this, we'll just say stat name. And then I'll have a description for the same thing if we want to show it in the character sheet. Just going to call it stat description. And I also want to have a property that represents the final value, something that we update whenever we calculate the value for the stat, so that we know what the value is when you have all of the buffs and debuffs added to the stat. So I just want to call it final value. And we also want a list for the buffs and debuffs, so in this case we're going to call them stat additives, and if we want to negate something, we would just make it a negative number. So it's just as straightforward. We just need one way to do it, though. We don't have to set up a different way to do a negative stat. But I would want that to be based on a different object. I'll make a stat bonus class really quick here. Go back into Visual Studio, and I'm going to keep this in its own file. One file, one class. Open this up real quick. Okay, and stat bonus, we need none of this, and it does not need to inherit from on a behavior. And all I want this to have is we'll set up a property that's going to be an integer. It's going to be a bonus value. And whenever we create a new stat bonus, all we have to do is add the bonus value to the bonus value property. So if we wanted to, say we equipped a sword that added 5 power. Well, I want to then add a stat bonus of 5 power to whatever stat, which will be power, just by creating a new stat bonus using the constructor that we'll set up right now. So I want to do a public stat bonus. And it will just need an integer of bonus value. And I'll set the bonus value property to be equal to bonus value. Now we are going to be setting this up to work with just adding and negating values. But you could easily do it with multipliers or both. You could have a separate list for stat modifiers that would be a multiplier. And what you would do is you would add your additive list that we're going to have, and then once you get done with that, you would just add your multipliers or multiply by your multipliers. Go through your list the same way we're going to go through the list of buffs you're going to have in this system, and do the exact same thing. And just to make sure that this is all working whenever we set this up, I want to set up a log here. Oh, I need to put something in, don't I? And I'm just going to say a new stat bonus initiated. There we go. And now back in base stat, what I'll do is I need the generic namespace for collections so that we can use a generic list. And it's going to just be property. It's going to be a list of the class we just created, which is stat bonus. And I'm going to call it stat additives. I don't know why, just name it whatever you want to, but that's going to be what I use. Or something like, let's do base additives. Okay, that'll work just fine. So I also need a constructor for this so that we can create new stats easily, which means that I do not want this to inherit from mono behavior because you cannot create a mono behavior using a constructor like that. So I'll do that. Get rid of mono behavior. We don't need it anyway. We're not using anything from that. So do a public base stat, just another constructor here, and set up a base value. Then set up the stat name, stat description, and we do not need a final value because that will be something that we calculate. That's all we need. Now base additives, whenever we create a new stat, I guess what we would do is just create a new list as well. So we don't have to assign any values when the stat is created. That'll be handled somewhere else. Say when we load in the player inventory, we'll also load in the gear, which we're not going to have a lot of gear. We might have like a sword and a shield, but that'll be about it. But we would load in the gear, and then when we do that, add the bonuses from those, the sword and the shield, to a list, and then take that list and create stat bonuses from that you would add to the stats. And that'll make sense later on, hopefully. But so doing that, we don't have to initiate the base stat with any base additives at all. So I'll just do a base additives is equal to a new list of stat bonus. So each time we create a new stat, we know it has an empty list of stat bonuses. And I'm using the this modifier even though you do not have to. I just like to use it so I can see what's going on. But notice it darkens it, telling me, hey, you don't need this. We know what you're talking about. But I am using it for making it easier to read. Do base value is equal to base value. It's equal to base value. Stat name is equal to stat name. And stat description is equal to stat description. All right, so now we can create a stat. It's pretty simple. What I want to be able to do now is add a modifier to a stat using the stat bonus class. So to do that, all we have to do is add something to the base additives list. So I'm going to create a method for handling that. It's going to be a simple void. Call it add stat bonus. And this will be something we can call on the stat itself. So if we have a list of stats, say in our character stat sheet, we can go on each stat, and this will be a method on that we can add a bonus using. It's going to be very simple. Stat bonus. Let's call it stat bonus. Okay, and inside of this, we'll do this.base additives. Again, this not necessary. And we'll just add to the list. We'll add the stat bonus that we're passing in. Pretty straightforward. And I'll do the same thing for removing. But what we're doing is we're going to be removing an object that is a stat bonus from the list. So when we use the list.remove, it's going to remove the first instance of that stat bonus that it finds, which is fine. So if we have a stat bonus of 5 from a sword and we remove the sword from our equipment, I would call remove stat bonus, pass it the sword's value, and it would be a stat bonus object. So it would go through, find an object that matches, and remove that object. Which it doesn't matter if it's the first one or the last one it finds, it's the same value, so it'll do the same thing. So remove stat bonus. And we'll also pass in a stat bonus object called stat bonus. And we'll do base additives dot remove stat bonus. Oh, sorry, stat, the one we're passing in, the parameter. If you wanted to remove all of that, you could use the remove all. If you're going to remove a specific index, you could do that too, but I can't understand the case for that in this system, but know that they're there if you need to use them. And the next thing we need for our base stat class is a way to return the final value that includes the calculated value of our stat. So that'll also be a method, but this method will return an integer and be public int, and I will call it get calculated stat value. And we'll just pass it. Oh no, actually we know what we're doing because we're calling this on the stat itself, so we don't have to pass it anything. It's just this stat. And it has to return an integer, so I'll just go ahead and return final value, even though currently final value is equal to nothing. Nothing's been assigned to it. So we'll have to handle that right here. And what I want to do is we're going to go through the base additives class, and we have to loop through each one, each additive in this class, and add it to the final value. So final value is going to equal the base value plus the base additives. So I'll go through base additives, and the first thing I want to do is I want to loop on each item in this list, each element in this list. So I'm going to use a for each off of that list. Now this is going to require us to create a delegate, and we're going to be using a Lambda expression, which is not something we've used before. But the approach that we're taking with this is very simple, so there's not going to be a lot of in-depth stuff going on here. So I'll just explain what we're doing here. So the for each item in the base additives we can do something with now. And what I want to do is I want to assign the value that we are currently on. Say if you're looping through like with a for loop and you have the index, right? So you're going to assign the index to, let's say, I. That's the one you're currently on. Well, you assigned it to I. What we're going to do in this is underneath it, it's going to use a for, and it's actually going to use the array index instead of an enumerable. So what we can do is I can just say X, and on the left side of the Lambda operator, which is the equal sign with a greater sign, on the left side of that, in this case, all we're doing is assigning a value of X to whatever the item we're currently on is. So the item we're currently on is X now. So I can do something with X, which X is an additive, which means it has a bonus value property, which is what we want. So I'll take final value, which right now is nothing, and I will add to it X bonus value, because X is a stat bonus and it has a bonus value property. So we're just taking the value of that, adding it to final value. But what we're going to have is the bonus value calculated, but not adding the base value to it. What if the base value starts out at 5, right? So we need to add the base value to what we just got. So how can we do that? Well, one way we can do that is final value is now equal to all the bonuses added up together in base additives. So all I'll do now is I'll just take final value and add what we have with base value. And that will add the value of base value to final value. Base value is not affected, but final value goes up however much base value is. And then we'll return that to wherever it was called, and we'll be done with that. Now we could have done this all together here, but I wanted to break it down to show you how this works. We can pull that out because now it's assigned to this, right? While this is completely local to this. The X is nothing outside of this. We can't touch it. But this is now assigned outside of that because it's a higher scope property. So that's going to be it for the base stat. But now what I want to do is, stat bonus is done too. I want to create a character stats class. And this is going to be something that we could add to our player to control the stats of the player, or maybe also add to the enemies to control the stats of the enemies. Whatever you'd like to do. But in this case, for now, it's going to be just for the player. We're going to open this up. And all we're going to do in here is I'm going to show you an example of how you could set up a stat list now, right? We have the ways to define the stats, but we need now to define them, add them to a list, maybe add a couple modifiers to play around with it. And then you can go from there with your own system. We'll add more to it because we're going to add weapons and stuff in this RPG. So I'll get rid of all that for now. And I'm going to need a little list, so we're going to go back to generics. Going to create a list of base stat. I'm going to call it just stats. Just like that. Now we have a list of base stats. Cool. So all I have to do now is add stats to this list, and our character, in this case our player, will have those stats. So I'll do that in start. It might be ideal to set this up in the inspector, right? So you can go through and define stats per character, however you have it assigned. Since if I do it all in start, everything that has this script file attached as a component will have these stats. So we'll set it up in the future where we can just define them in the inspector. Which in that case, we might use an array because we can define the length of the array in the inspector. Or we might write a custom inspector in the future, custom editor. We'll see. But for now, we'll do it this way. And I was going to do stats.add. And the way we'll handle this is I can do a new base stat. And all I have to do is pass it some values. It needs the base value. So this is going to be power. And it's going to start out at 4 for this. Maybe you have a class system, right? We're not going to have it, but maybe you do. So you can have each one starting with different attributes from the beginning, and you can define them this way by setting the base values. That's where everything starts out at, or however you want to do it. That's just an idea. So I'm going to then name it. I'll say power, and then pass a description, your power level. Okay, something like that, and then add the parentheses. So now this character has a stat of 4 that is the power level. Pretty cool. But what if I wanted to add a bonus to this stat that we just created? How could we do that? Well, I could go through stats, and we know that this is 0, right? We know the stat we just added is at the index of 0. Now you'd want to set up a way to maybe find a stat by ID or power or name. But in this case, we'll just keep it very simple with the indexes. And I can just hit add stat bonus. As simple as that. And inside of this, I'll do new stat bonus because it needs a stat bonus object. Now we could just pass this method some properties, some parameters, and then let the method in base stat handle creating the stat bonus object if that's easier. But in this case, we may have a list of stat bonus objects that we wanted to pass to our stat. So it would be easier to create the objects in, say, character stats or the armory, wherever we will be creating these stats. For now, right here. So I need a stat bonus, and all it needs is a value. So I want to add 5, right? So it's going to add 5 to the power level. I could do -5, and it would remove 5 from the power level, making it -1 overall. So we'll add 5. And if I were to log this out, the idea is we would get 9 now. So I'm going to log out the value. Oops, can't do it that way, can I? The value of power. And the way we get that is we do get calculated stat value. That's going to return an integer that adds the stat bonus, or however many stat bonuses that we have, to power. And if everything is right, this should work just fine. I'm going to add that to, let's see, add it, come on, let it compile. I'm going to add it to player. There it is. And I'm going to play. Alright, so we have 4, but it says new stat bonus initiated. So, alright, so what is it? Let's see. Stat bonus. Oh, I'm referring to the property and not the parameter that we're passing into the constructor. Okay, so that should work. Okay, so we have 9 as the total value. Is that what we're supposed to have? 5, 4, yes, so 9 is correct. Let's say I wanted to add some more, right? I would just copy this line here. Oops, that's not how I want to do that. And we'd add it to the same stat, because we only have one stat to work with now anyway. Now we'd add, say, 21 and 7. Maybe make it -7 just for fun. You could also remove it by doing it the same way. You know, just do remove stat bonus, and it would do that for us. So the way I would handle this with equipment, though, is I would have a list of the equipment values as a stat bonus, and then I would just go through, loop through each one like we do in the base stat class. Add up all the values. Say if we have a sword and a shield, and that gives us a power level total of 12, right? So 7 from the sword and 5 from the shield. That's 12 total. So I would take that, add them up in the list, and then take that total value, make a new stat bonus, and pass it to the base stat as 12. And then whenever that's updated, whenever we remove the sword or add a new sword, recalculate that, pass it back in again. And that's not the most inefficient way to do it, so that's good. And that's going to do it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. In the next part, I wish I could tell you, I don't really know where we're going to go in the next part. We have a bunch of stuff to do. We have to work on the weapon system with some basic attacking. We need to work on the inventory. We need to work on fleshing out the stats that we just started. We want to work on some UI elements, you know, some health bars and the character sheet maybe where we could see our stats and stuff. That kind of stuff that's fun. The attack system is going to be cool, but it's going to be very simple, right? So the idea that I have right now, I've not went through it yet, but the idea that I have right now is that the attack's going to be based on the weapon. So each weapon itself, the physical weapon, will have a component attached to it that will define its behavior specifically. So if we have a sword, that's fine, you know, it'll swing like a sword. If we have a special sword, it can have a different attack entirely because it's a separate thing. It might inherit from a base, say, sword attack or sword object that defines a base sword, but then we're also going to have specials that can inherit from that and do whatever they want. Or, you know, a bow and arrow, I don't know if we'll get into that, but you could also have that as a weapon in the same system because it'll be defined on its own object instead of in the system, like hard-coded in the system. You can define each one. That way we can have unlimited types of weapons, from grenades to bow and arrows and whatever you want. You know, if you want to just have a, I don't know, a flamethrower, you could do that. It all depends on the weapon itself. So we're going to have the character call a component on the weapon. They're all going to have the same structure, may inherit from, let's say, a weapon interface. So they all have the exact same structure. We know what it has, so we can rely on it. We can call an attack method on it, or a use method that will then do whatever it does specifically for that type of weapon, which would be pretty cool. But there's a lot to do, guys, and I'm sorry I'm not getting the videos out as quickly as I would like to. I have work and other things going on right now, so it just takes a while to make these videos, but I do enjoy doing them, and I hope you enjoy watching them. Let me know what you guys like to see in the future. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments below. My name is Austin, and I will see you next time.